Studies Section 3, Racism and Sexism. Introduction. Racism is a belief or perception that a particular race is superior to another. This belief about how different groups of people are to be viewed has changed to more subtle forms of discrimination. In the modern world, such sexism, the perception that women are inferior to men in fundamental respect. Learning outcome in Studies Section 3. Learning outcome 1.3. Explain the concept of modern racism. Learning outcome 2.3. How is sexism expressed in the Nigerian context? Learning outcome 3.3. Discuss the concept sexism. Content. It is now quite uncommon, neither is it legally acceptable, to engage in many forms of discrimination that were once common in many countries about half a century ago. This change has created conflict in many people between what they think and feel inside, what they believe is prudent or acceptable to say or do publicly. To some people, it has created conflict between competing beliefs and values. For example, the belief in equal treatment and the desire to make up for past injustices through some form of affirmative actions. You may have the belief that one ought to feel the same towards members of all groups, but at the same time feel a resistance within to actualize that belief. This sort of conflict has inspired social psychologists to develop new theoretical explanations for this modern form of prejudice. Kinder and Sears, 1981. Swim, Aiken, All and Hunter, 1995, and others noted that the old-fashioned racism has largely disappeared in countries like the United States, but it has been replaced by a subtler one, modern racism or symbolic racism. Modern racism explicitly rejects racist beliefs on the one hand, while inwardly nurturing animosity or suspicion towards blacks, for instance, by undermining cherished principles of justice and inequality. It is the way in which an individual harbors unacknowledged and negative feelings, attitudes towards minority groups that stems from in-group favorism and a desire to defend the status quo. Sidamos and Prato, 1999. Thus, whether or not such a person will act in a prejudiced or discriminatory manner will very much depend on the details of the situation. If the situation offers no justification or disguise for discriminatory action, people's response will conform to their egalitarian values. On the other hand, if a suitable rationalization is readily available, the modern racist prejudices will emerge. Question. The way in which an individual harbors unacknowledged and negative feelings and attitudes towards minority groups that stems from in-group favorism and a desire to defend the status quo is referred to as dash. A. Hostile sexism. B. Modern sexism. C. Symbolic racism. D. Symbolic sexism. The correct answer was C. A. Reason. The correct answer was C because symbolic racism refers to the way in which an individual harbors unacknowledged and negative feelings and attitudes towards minority groups that stems from in-group favorism and a desire to defend the status quo, hence provided the most suitable option for the question. Options A, B, and D were not the answer because hostile sexism, modern sexism, and symbolic sexism does not explain the concept of symbolic racism. In most cases, the prejudice or dissemination is marked and the individual remains comfortably unaware of being a racist. Sexism. There is a belief that women are less competent and intelligent than men, and at the same time believe that they are warmer and more interpersonally skilled. Steve Glick and Susan Fiske, 2001, noted two types of sexism in their study, which covered 19 nations: benevolent and hostile sexism. Benevolent sexism is a subjectively favorable ideology that offers protection and affection to women who embrace conventional roles. These often coexist with hostile sexism. Hostile sexism, an antipathy towards women who are viewed as usurping men's power. Such partly positive stereotypes may be particularly resistant to change. In many instances, this has culminated into the establishment of such movements as women liberation. In Nigeria, the feminist groups are involved in a series of awareness and advocacy programs for more recognition of position of women in political offices and institutions. Question. The two major types of sexism identified by Steve and Fiske, 2001 was A. Benevolent and hostile sexism, B. Modern sexism and symbolic sexism, C. Racism and sexisms. The answer was A. By reason. The answer was A because benevolent and hostile sexism was the only two major types of sexism identified by Steve and Fiske, 2001. Therefore, provides the most suitable option for the question. Option B and C were not the answer. Modern sexism explicitly rejects racist beliefs but inwardly nurtures animosity against another group, whilst racism is an old-fashioned and has given way to a more subtle form called modern or symbolic racism. Assessment of true attitudes. Surveys of people's attitudes towards certain groups cannot be fully trusted because respondents may not think it is acceptable to express what they really feel, or people may not fully know how they feel. In other words, there exists some conflict between what is covertly felt and what is overtly stated. Since so many forms of prejudice and ambivalence are uncertain or hidden, they are not likely to be revealed through self-report in researches. Thus, indirect measures are often used. An example is implicit association test, IAT, and priming. Question. Sexism, modern racism, and racism. 1. An old-fashioned and has given way to a more subtle form called modern or symbolic racism is dash. 2. Dash explicitly rejects racist beliefs but inwardly nurtures animosity against another group. 3. Dash is the belief that women are less competent and intelligent than men. Answers. A. Racism. B. Modern racism. C. Sexism. Summary. In this section, you have learnt about the concept of racism and sexism. Kinder and Sears, 1981. Swim, Aiken, Hall, and Hunter, 1995. And others noted that racism has become old-fashioned and has given way to a more subtle form called modern or symbolic racism. Modern racism explicitly rejects racist beliefs but inwardly nurtures animosity against another group. It is the way in which an individual harbors unacknowledged and negative feelings and attitudes towards minority groups that stems from in-group favorism and a desire to defend the status quo. Sidamus and Prato, 1999. In other words, as far as racism and sexism are concerned, prejudice or discrimination is masked while the individual is quite unaware of them. This chapter 2 introduced to us the concept of sexism, a belief that women are less competent and intelligent than men. Sexism also mentally restricts women only to certain conventional roles. Any deviation is seen as usurping men's exclusive roles. Measuring this hidden attitude requires indirect measures like implicit association test (IAT) priming. This is the end of study section 3. Thanks for listening.